The clatter of plates and the hum of conversation filled the small, bustling diner. It wasn't much, just a roadside eatery on the outskirts of town. But for Jake Carter, it was the only warm place he could sit without being rushed out. Dressed in an old, faded hoodie with a torn sleeve and jeans that had seen better days, Jake clutched the last dollar bill in his pocket. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he had already made up his mind. Tonight, he would go without food. Across the diner, Emma Fields, a kind-hearted waitress in her mid-20s, juggled plates and coffee cups with practiced ease. Despite the exhaustion in her eyes, she wore a warm smile for every customer. She noticed Jake the moment he walked in, how he hesitated before sitting, how his eyes scanned the menu but never flipped the page, as if hoping to find something cheaper than the cheapest option. After a moment's pause, Emma made a decision. She walked over, her voice gentle. "Hey there, what can I get you?" Jake hesitated. Just a coffee. Black." Emma's heart clenched. He was clearly starving. Without another word, she disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned, not just with coffee, but with a full meal: eggs, toast, and a side of hash browns. Jake's eyes widened. I didn't order this," Emma winked. "On the house." He opened his mouth to argue but found himself too choked up to speak. Instead, he nodded in gratitude and began eating, savoring every bite. When he finished, Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his last dollar bill. He placed it carefully under the coffee cup before standing up. As he walked toward the door, Emma called out, "Hey, you forgot your..." She paused when she saw the bill, neatly tucked with a note written on a napkin. "This is my last dollar. You needed it more than I did." "Thank you." Tears pricked her eyes. She wanted to run after him, to give it back, but by the time she looked up, he was already gone. Little did Jake know, that small act of kindness was about to change his life in ways he never imagined. Jake stepped out into the cold night, his stomach no longer empty, but his pockets completely bare. He had nothing left, not even bus fare. His plan was to head to the park and find a bench to sleep on, like so many nights before. As he walked past an alley, he heard a groan. Stopping in his tracks, he turned to see an older man slumped against a dumpster, clutching his chest. His breathing was ragged and his face was pale. Jake's instincts kicked in. He rushed to the man's side. "Hey, are you okay? What's wrong?" The man gasped. My heart. My pills. Pocket." Jake quickly reached into the man's coat pocket and found a small bottle of heart medication. His hands trembled as he popped the cap and placed a pill in the man's mouth. After a few moments, the man's breathing stabilized. He looked up at Jake with tired but grateful eyes. "You saved my life, kid," he wheezed. "I owe you one." Jake shook his head. "No need. Just take care of yourself, all right?" The man studied him. "You look like you could use a break yourself." Jake chuckled dryly. "You could say that." The old man nodded and reached into his jacket, pulling out a worn business card. He pressed it into Jake's hand. "Come see me tomorrow. I have a feeling I can help you." Jake glanced down at the card. His eyes widened. It read, "William Hargrove, CEO of Hargrove Enterprises." His breath hitched. He had just saved the life of a billionaire. Little did he know, this encounter was about to turn his world upside down. Jake stood on the sidewalk, gripping the business card like it was a winning lottery ticket. Could this really be happening? He had spent months struggling just to survive, and now, out of nowhere, he had saved a billionaire's life. Doubt gnawed at him. What if this is some kind of joke? What if he just gave me the card out of pity? but something in the old man's eyes had seemed sincere. What do I have to lose? The next morning, Jake arrived at Hargrove Enterprises, an imposing glass skyscraper in the heart of the city. The contrast between his worn-out clothes and the sleek, polished environment couldn't have been more stark. As he stepped through the revolving doors, a receptionist in a sharp suit gave him a disapproving glance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone skeptical. Jake hesitated, then held up the business card. "I'm here to see Mr. Hargrove." The receptionist's eyes flickered with doubt. "Do you have an appointment?" Before Jake could answer, a deep voice cut through the room. "He doesn't need one." Jake turned to see William Hargrove himself, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. He looked much stronger than the man who had nearly collapsed in the alley the night before. "This young man is my guest," Hargrove said. The receptionist's demeanor shifted instantly. "Of course, sir." "Right this way." Jake followed Hargrove through an opulent hallway and into a massive office with a breathtaking view of the city. The billionaire gestured for Jake to sit. "You saved my life, Jake. I never forget a debt. Tell me, what's your story?" For the first time in a long while, someone actually wanted to hear about him. So he told the truth, about losing his job, his home, and how he had nothing left except for a single dollar, which he had given to the kind waitress. Hargrove listened intently, then leaned forward. "You remind me of myself when I was young." Jake blinked. "Wait, you were homeless?" Hargrove chuckled. "For 2 years. But someone gave me a chance and that changed everything." He reached into his desk and pulled out a checkbook. "Now I want to do the same for you." Jake's heart pounded as Hargrove scrawled something on the check and slid it across the desk. Jake hesitated before looking down. And when he did, his breath caught in his throat. The check was for $50,000. Jake's hands trembled as he stared at the check. $50,000. More money than he had seen in his entire life. His first instinct was to push it back. This had to be some kind of mistake. "Sir, I can't accept this," he stammered, looking up at Hargrove in disbelief. The billionaire chuckled. "Jake, this isn't charity. Consider it an investment in your future. I don't believe in handouts, I believe in second chances." Jake swallowed hard. "But why me? You don't even know me." Hargrove leaned back in his chair, studying Jake carefully. "I see something in you. The way you gave away your last dollar when you had nothing. That's the kind of person I want in my company." Jake's eyes widened. "Your company?" Hargrove nodded. "I'm offering you a job. Not just any job, but a fresh start. You're smart, you have heart, and you were willing to help someone without expecting anything in return. That's rare." The words hit Jake like a truck. Was this real? Could this actually be happening? What kind of job?" Jake asked cautiously. Hargrove smiled. "We'll start you in an entry-level position. Learn the ropes, prove yourself, and who knows? Maybe one day you'll be running this place." Jake's mind spun. This was too much. A few days ago, he was sleeping on a park bench. Now, a billionaire was offering him not just money, but a future. He exhaled sharply, still gripping the check. "I don't know what to say." Hargrove stood and extended a hand. "Say yes." Jake looked at the outstretched hand, then at the check, and finally he thought about his life. The struggles, the loneliness, the hopelessness. Maybe this was fate. Maybe karma really did work in mysterious ways. Slowly, he reached forward and shook Hargrove's hand. Yes. And just like that, his life changed forever. Jake stood in front of the towering glass building, his heart pounding in his chest. Just days ago, he had been scraping by, unsure of where his next meal would come from. Now, he was about to walk into the corporate world as an employee of Hargrove Enterprises. He adjusted the suit that Mr. Hargrove had personally arranged for him. It felt strange, wearing something so crisp and new, something that didn't carry the weight of struggle in its fabric. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The lobby was immaculate, gleaming marble floors, towering windows, and a front desk where a well-dressed receptionist smiled professionally. He suddenly felt out of place. "Mr. Lawson?" A voice pulled him from his thoughts. Jake turned to see a sharply dressed woman approaching him. "I'm Emily, Mr. Hargrove's assistant. He asked me to show you around." Jake swallowed his nerves and shook her hand. "Nice to meet you." She led him through the office, explaining things as they walked. "You'll be starting in the logistics department. It's an entry-level position, but Mr. Hargrove believes in internal growth. If you work hard, there's no telling where you'll end up." Jake nodded, absorbing every word. He wasn't about to waste this opportunity. When they reached his new desk, he saw a group of employees whispering and stealing glances at him. He could almost hear their thoughts. "Who is this guy? Why is Mr. Hargrove taking a personal interest in him?" He couldn't blame them. He was the outsider, the guy who had walked in off the streets and straight into an opportunity most people worked years for. He sat down, taking in his surroundings. This was real. This was happening. Now, all he had to do was prove that he belonged. Jake spent the first few days at Hargrove Enterprises quietly observing. He wasn't the most qualified person in the room, and he knew it. But what he lacked in experience, he made up for in determination. However, not everyone was happy about his presence. At lunch, he overheard whispers. "I don't get it. He has no background in corporate work. Why did Mr. Hargrove hire him? Must be a charity case. He'll probably mess up and get fired soon." Jake clenched his fists under the table, but forced himself to stay calm. They didn't know his story. One afternoon, his manager, David Carter, walked over with a stack of reports. "Jake, I need you to analyze these logistics reports and have a summary ready by tomorrow morning." Jake took the papers, but his stomach tightened. He had no experience in logistics reports. What if he messed up? That night, instead of going home, he stayed in the office, reading, researching, and taking notes. He watched online tutorials, Googled financial terms he didn't understand, and refused to give up. By morning, he had a solid report ready. When David saw it, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Not bad, Lawson. Didn't expect you to handle this so quickly." Jake kept his tone neutral. "I learn fast." David smirked. "We'll see." A week later, an emergency hit the company. A shipment worth millions of dollars had gone missing in transit, and nobody could figure out what had happened. The logistics team scrambled, but nothing made sense. The numbers weren't adding up. Jake, sitting at his desk, felt an itch in his mind. He remembered something from the reports he had studied, an inconsistency he had noticed but hadn't thought much about. He grabbed the files and started tracing the shipment's journey. Then it hit him. A rerouted order, a location mix-up. The shipment wasn't lost, it was in the wrong warehouse. Jake jumped from his seat and ran to David's office. "I think I found it." David, exhausted and frustrated, looked skeptical. "You found it?" Jake laid out the evidence. As he spoke, David's expression changed. The numbers matched. The logic was sound. Within an hour, the company confirmed Jake's findings. The shipment was located and redirected, saving the business millions. At the next team meeting, Mr. Hargrove himself stepped in. "I want to acknowledge someone who proved that determination and hard work matter more than background. Jake Lawson solved a problem even our senior staff struggled with. Well done." Jake felt a rush of pride. Around the room, the same people who had doubted him now looked at him differently. Some still held resentment, but others nodded with newfound respect. He had proved himself. But this was only the beginning. A few weeks after his major success with the lost shipment, Jake found himself settling into his role at Hargrove Enterprises. People were starting to respect him, and he finally felt like he belonged. But then came the real test, the kind that defines a man's character. One evening, as Jake was working late, he overheard a conversation that made his stomach turn. David Carter, his manager, was talking to a supplier over the phone. "I don't care if the materials are subpar," David said. "As long as we cut costs, I'll make sure it gets approved. And don't worry about Jake. He's too new to notice." Jake's heart pounded. Cutting corners on materials. That could damage the company's reputation, or worse, put people at risk. He had two choices: stay quiet, keep his job, and let it slide. Expose the corruption, even if it meant losing everything. He knew what the old Jake would have done. But that Jake was gone. The next morning, Jake walked into Mr. Hargrove's office. "Sir, I need to talk to you about something serious." He laid out everything: the shady deal, the supplier, David's involvement. Mr. Hargrove's face darkened. He leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment. Then, he pressed a button on his intercom. "Get David Carter in here, now." Minutes later, David entered, completely unaware of what was coming. "Jake here tells me you've been making backdoor deals with suppliers, cutting corners, endangering our reputation." David's face turned pale. "That's ridiculous. He's just a kid who got lucky with one report." Jake held his ground. "I have proof: emails, call logs, and shipment records." He placed a folder on the desk. David's jaw clenched. "You little—" Mr. Hargrove cut him off. "That's enough." He looked at security. "Escort Mr. Carter out of the building. Permanently." As David was led away, he shot Jake a furious glare. "You just made a powerful enemy." Jake simply said, "I did the right thing." A few days later, Jake was called back into Mr. Hargrove's office. "You could have stayed quiet, but you didn't. That tells me you're not just smart. You've got integrity. And that's the kind of leadership we need." Jake held his breath. "I'm promoting you. Effective immediately, you'll be handling key operations directly under me." Jake blinked. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Mr. Hargrove smiled. "Just keep proving me right." Jake left the office with his head high. He had come in as a broke man looking for a second chance. Now, he was on his way to becoming a leader. And this time, karma had finally paid him back in the biggest way possible.